He slammed the door so hard the whiteboard markers rattled off their tray. "Who the hell approved this architecture?" he barked, pointing at the design I'd spent 4 years refining. "This is prehistoric, monolithic garbage. My guys can rebuild this in a weekend." I didn't flinch, just kept sipping my lukewarm coffee from the cracked Code Like a Girl mug my daughter gave me. The same mug I used every day while writing the algorithm that now powered half their Fortune 500 client stack. He didn't know that. Or maybe he didn't care. To him, I was just legacy clutter in an office he wanted to fill with VC-approved buzzwords and interns who wore sneakers louder than their opinions. Let me pause for a second and say this. If you're still listening and haven't subscribed or liked the video, go ahead and tap that now. It helps way more than you think. And yeah, we see you. 97% just listen and scroll. But this story, you'll want to know how it ends. Anyway, that was my first official introduction to our new CTO, Parker Langley. Fresh off the Stanford hype train, carrying a stack of failed app startups and daddy's hedge fund on his back. He walked into our acquired office like a man shopping for parts in a junkyard, oblivious that the only engine keeping this company from stalling was humming quietly under my desk. I'd built the compression system in my garage. Literally, in the same space where my daughter practiced her science fair volcanoes. It started as a side project, a way to solve bloated file storage for freelance developers, and evolved into something leaner, faster, and more stable than anything on the market. When the startup noticed it, they folded me into the company with promises: founders-style equity, technical control, and autonomy. I didn't need glory. I just wanted to protect what I built. For a while, that deal held. The CEO kept his word. The VCs were happy. The patents were in motion. The system cut cloud costs by 68%. We onboarded 3 of the top 5 retail giants in a single quarter. And then, the acquisition. That's when Parker arrived. Tall, smug, Silicon Valley smirk permanently installed. He had no idea how the system worked and even less interest in learning. He wanted AI buzzwords, Docker containers, and a TikTok-friendly office tour. Within a week, he started rewriting policy. Within 2, I was being restructured out of my leadership lane. He replaced my junior lead, brilliant, loyal, meticulous, with a bootcamp grad who once used Excel to track memory leaks. But I didn't push back. Not yet. I've learned that when a man like Parker comes swinging into the room with a grin and a whiteboard, you don't interrupt him. You let him write, you let him talk, you let him sign everything in ink. Because eventually, he'll sign something he shouldn't. He hosted an all-hands on a Thursday, stood in front of the team like Moses on a Red Bull drip, preaching agile reinvention and code refactoring sprints. He didn't mention me once. Not when he demoed the compression engine's new wrapper. Not when he explained the logic gates. Hell, he even called the core engine open source adjacent, which is corporate doublespeak for we plan to rip it off and pretend we made it. I watched from the back of the room, arms crossed. Not angry, not sad, just collecting, recording. That's what women like me learn to do in tech, especially when we're the only ones left from the garage days. He ended the presentation with a joke. And don't worry, folks. If anything breaks, we've got backups of the backups. What could possibly go wrong? Everyone laughed, except me, because I knew what they didn't. There was one backup that had never been transferred. A provisional patent application, filed under one name, mine. Parker sauntered into the Monday morning dev sync 15 minutes late, sipping something green and overpriced out of a mason jar like it held enlightenment. His first sentence? "We're rewriting the compression module in Rust. AI-driven inference, full pipeline overhaul. Thoughts?" I blinked. Thought? Sure. 1. That's not how inference works. 2. If he pushed a language shift without respecting the original architecture, the whole system would fracture like an old window hit by a fast baseball. 3. There weren't enough thoughts in the world to save him from what that would break. I raised a hand. Rust isn't compatible with the inline caching model we use. You'll destroy the latency benefit that keeps our pipeline ahead of AWS's. He nodded slowly, like he was listening to a child explain crayons. Yeah, but it's modern and performant. Our investors keep asking why we're not using it. Plus, it'll make recruiting easier. Easier for who? Fresh grads who'd never seen a production environment? Easier for Parker, who only knew how to pitch, not how to preserve. We're dealing with massive data sets, Parker. If you push this without converting the entire compression structure, you'll introduce drift, artifacts. Your logs won't match your inputs, and you'll break ISO compliance. That means lawsuits. He smiled, leaned against the wall like he was posing for TechCrunch. It's 2025. If a little artifacting keeps you up at night, you're in the wrong game. This ain't the Museum of Old Code. Then he looked straight at me, voice syrupy with sarcasm. You've had a great run, but this isn't duct tape and chewing gum anymore. We're done with old guy tech. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, letting the silence wrap around me like armor. Everyone else shifted awkwardly in their chairs. A couple of my old teammates looked down at their laptops. One of the junior engineers, the one I'd mentored through his first kernel panic, wouldn't meet my eyes. But it wasn't the insult that burned. It was the recklessness, the sheer speed of it all. The way he dismantled in 2 weeks what took me 8 years to build. No testing protocol. No contingency plans. No understanding of what he was ripping out. Just the hunger to leave his mark. Later that day, I checked the internal wiki. The entire documentation set for the engine, my documentation, had been flagged for deprecated content. Someone had rewritten the header to read, Legacy System, Pending Refactor. That same afternoon, I got a calendar invite from HR, title transition discussion. Cute. I walked the long way back to my desk, past the old glass whiteboard where we used to scribble late-night notes on entropy curves and error handling. Someone had erased all of it. Now it held motivational quotes in neon marker. One said, "Move fast and don't apologize." I smiled at that one. He really should have apologized, or at least asked who owned the damn IP. But Parker didn't care about things like ownership or compliance. Not when he had buzzwords to chase and slides to prep. Not when he thought I was just a speed bump on his road to a TechCrunch profile and a book deal about disrupting the old guard. What he didn't know, what none of them bothered to check, was that the engine wasn't just old code. It was a chain, and I still held the lock. The Slack ping came while I was reviewing integration logs alone in the war room, the room they used to call mine. Quick update, read the message from Parker. We're green-lighting full API exposure to CloudForge for the upcoming demo. Need you to prep the compression endpoints. My fingers froze on the keyboard. CloudForge. That bottom-feeding partner with a reputation for mirroring proprietary code, rewrapping it, and pitching it as their enhanced solution. They'd been sued twice already for IP laundering, the kind of company that hired more lawyers than engineers. I messaged back, has legal reviewed their TOS? They reserve the right to cache submitted payloads for optimization. That could include our source-level responses. No response. So I followed up in the channel, tagging the compliance team. Pasted the clause from CloudForge's service agreement, highlighted the exact line that said, partner data may be retained, parsed, and used to enhance platform offerings. There it was, in black and white. If we piped our engine into theirs without strict guardrails, we were handing over the crown jewels, gift-wrapped and unprotected. A minute later, my Slack lit up. Parker, direct message. If you're not happy, you can get the hell out. Not, let's discuss. Not, loop in legal, just that. A cold, smug mic drop from a man who didn't even understand what he was giving away. I stared at the message for a full 30 seconds, not blinking. The air around me stilled. It was like everything went underwater. The noise of keyboards and shallow hallway chatter fell away. Because I wasn't angry. I was done. I leaned back in my chair and felt something settle inside me. Not rage, not bitterness. Clarity. He'd just triggered the clause I'd been holding in reserve for 3 years. Back when the startup first acquired my engine, legal had drafted a catch-all IP transfer addendum, a rushed document filled with placeholders and bad assumptions. I flagged it. They said they'd revise. They never did. My signature was missing. But Parker wouldn't have known that. He never looked. He just assumed it was all his. Assumptions are expensive, especially when they're carved into a $630 million valuation. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the old manila folder I kept tucked between dusty notebooks and expired software stickers. Inside was the original provisional patent filing, my name, my address, my fingerprints on every function, dated, signed, and quietly untouched. No one in this company, not even the new investors, had ever asked to see the final reassignment forms. And now, Parker, in his rush to be the fastest disruptor in a room already burning, had just invited me to leave. I took him at his word. I closed the laptop, slid my badge into my back pocket, and stood up. No goodbyes, no fanfare. Just one last look around the floor, where some of the new kids were high-fiving over a JIRA ticket they didn't understand. As I walked out, I passed the bootcamp hire who'd been handed my systems chart. He was sweating through his t-shirt, running performance tests on an environment he hadn't secured. He looked up at me, opened his mouth like he wanted to say something. I didn't give him the chance. Parker thought he'd humiliated me. What he didn't realize was this. I don't play power games. I build infrastructure. And when it collapses, I know exactly which wires to cut. No farewell email, no cardboard box of cliches. I packed light. My badge, a 128GB flash drive with the logs Parker never thought to archive, and the manila folder that had sat untouched in my drawer like a sleeping dragon. I didn't even shut my laptop. Let them find out it still needed my admin token to access the final compression sandbox. I'd rotated the keys a week ago. No one asked why. No one noticed. They were too busy giving Slack kudos to Parker's pet bootcamper for modernizing the deployment cycle, which mostly involved renaming variables and breaking the checksum validation. My desk was in the corner, not a glamorous seat, but the one with the best airflow and the fewest interruptions. It's where I'd sat when the first live deployment clipped 2.8 GB off our largest client's storage invoice. When the second investor said, "Your compression engine is the only thing that makes this scalable." When we all pulled an all-nighter and watched the logs scroll like confetti on New Year's Eve. That desk had history, but not future. I looped my scarf once around my neck, smoothed the crests in my jeans, and walked out like I was going to lunch. The intern at reception waved. HR didn't even glance up from their spreadsheets. They thought the exit had already happened the moment Parker reassigned my title on the org chart. What they didn't understand, and wouldn't until it was too late, is that titles don't own code. I paused outside the project war room. Inside, the board still had remnants of my architecture notes in faint marker. Someone had tried to erase them, but some ideas cling harder than ink. There was a printout of the Q3 roadmap pinned up next to a post-it someone scribbled in Sharpie. Don't overthink, just build. I grinned at that, because they were about to learn what happens when you don't think. The hallway echoed with the clack of keyboards and startup optimism. Somewhere, someone was giving a demo of our next-gen cloud accelerator, which still ran on the framework I wrote in my garage while my daughter was in elementary school. They were already calling it theirs, already filing the quarterly forecasts like the patent was a foregone conclusion. I exited the building through the side stairwell, the one no one used except janitorial staff and people with something to carry they didn't want seen. Fitting, really. I had something they didn't see coming. Outside, it was raining, light, cold, the kind of rain that doesn't soak but sneaks into your sleeves and collar. I didn't mind. It felt honest, like gravity remembering how to whisper. At the edge of the parking lot, I turned once, not out of sentiment, out of curiosity. The company logo, shiny, bold, mounted on brushed steel, was now missing a light on the O, a flicker, an imperfection. I took that as a sign. As I stepped into my car, the flash drive buzzed slightly in my coat pocket. Inside it, a copy of the logs, the patent submission chain, the email thread with legal confirming the addendum delay, and a silent copy of the license structure, time-stamped and traceable. Let them scramble. Let them hit send on a dozen Slack channels, wondering why the test environment wasn't syncing. Let them keep pushing builds that crash without my error handling patch. They thought I was leaving with nothing. But I left with the one thing they couldn't fake, buy, or rebuild: ownership. It was almost midnight when the message came in, short, vague, but pulsing with quiet alarm. "You around? Off the record. Did you ever sign the final IP transfer?" I sat up in bed. The glow from my phone painted shadows across the ceiling fan. It was Maya, a mid-level counsel who used to split coffee runs with me before she got pulled into Parker's restructuring sweep. She was smart, one of the only ones who read between the lines instead of just clicking through DocuSign like it was Tinder. I typed back, "Which one? The IP Schedule A or the assignment addendum?" A pause. Then, addendum. There's a question going around. Your name's not on the final submission. And the USPTO records, they only show your original filing. Nothing past the provisional. I didn't reply right away. I swung my legs out of bed and walked to the small filing cabinet I kept behind my desk. The one with the lock Parker's team never noticed because I never asked for a new one. Second drawer, left side. Manila folder, still labeled in faded Sharpie, Foundry Seed filing, May 17th. Inside, my provisional application, time-stamped 6 months before the company even existed, with the compression engine structure, test results, and validation logs. My name, my address, my signature. Next to it, stapled in the corner, was the email from the company's original counsel. Let's revisit this language before we finalize. There's a liability clause that's a little too broad. We'll revise and circle back. That was almost 3 years ago. They never did, and I never pushed. Because in this game, silence is safer than certainty. If you wait long enough, someone will forget to follow through, and if you keep your paperwork clean, it becomes your parachute. I messaged Maya back. Nope, flagged it. They ghosted. Not my signature. Her typing bubble popped up, then stopped, then started again. This is going to get weird, I replied. Only for them. Because here's what most people don't understand about IP, especially the VC crowd and their fast-track CTOs with Instagram bios longer than their resumes. Owning an idea isn't about who says it in a meeting. It's about who signs what, when, and how clean the paper trail is. And my trail was immaculate. The original founders thought they'd wrapped up the engine during the acquisition, but they'd focused on headline value. Compression, patent pending. They assumed legal had tied the bow. Parker, arrogant and oblivious, never once asked for a copy of the assignment log. And once he took over, he nuked half the compliance workflows in favor of lean execution. He leaned too far. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was anxious, but because I was alert. I went back through every folder, every timestamp, every invoice that referenced the engine. I traced the path from prototype to product, noting the places they'd slapped the trademark next to code I'd written solo. The more I read, the calmer I got, because they hadn't just failed to transfer the patent. They'd built their valuation on something they never actually owned. And now the system, my system, was integrated across 5 Fortune 500 infrastructures, with my compression logic quietly running behind every upload, every file shift, every cloud archive they build. I poured a cup of coffee at 3:17 a.m., stared out the window, and whispered the sentence that had carried me through every setback, every erasure, every meeting where a man took credit for my diagram. They're going to learn what happens when you ignore the woman who built the foundation. And this time, they'd learn it in federal filing. 8:03 a.m. sharp. I hadn't even opened the blinds when the first call came through. Unknown number, local area code. I let it ring out. Then came the next. And the next. Voicemail after voicemail, each one stacking on top of the last like bricks in a panic bunker. By 8:15, my inbox looked like someone had set off a fire drill inside the legal department. Subject lines like, urgent, IP schedule review, clarification needed, re-patent status, time sensitive, please respond. I opened one, then another. Same tone, overly polite, the kind of politeness that only shows up when someone's legal exposure has just walked out the door with a manila folder. At 8:27 a.m., my phone rang again. This time, a number I recognized. Marcus, our original founder, or what was left of him. Since the acquisition, he'd been promoted to Strategic Innovation Advisor, which is Silicon Valley code for, we can't legally fire you, but please stay out of the way. I answered, hi, Marcus. His voice cracked like he'd aged a decade since I left. We need to talk. I just came out of a meeting. They're saying the patent's still in your name. I said nothing. They're checking the USPTO logs and, look, I know we talked about transferring it, but did you ever finalize the assignment? Please tell me you did. I took a long sip of coffee. You know I flagged that clause. I asked for a revision. Legal never followed up. A pause, then the hollow thud of a hand hitting a desk. Jesus Christ. I kept the emails, I said. Calm, no gloating, just facts. I also still have the original provisional filing, time-stamped, notarized, and backed up in 3 locations. He didn't respond. Then another voice joined the call, tinny and rattled through speakerphone. "Hi, this is Cheryl from compliance. Can you confirm, for the record, that you never executed the IP reassignment agreement?" There it was, the sentence that flipped the script, the one they'd been scrambling to avoid since sunrise. The moment they realized silence wasn't passive, it was strategy. "I can confirm," I said. "I never signed it." Silence. You could hear the oxygen leave the room on their end. Papers shuffling. Someone muttering, "Oh my God," just off mic. Then Marcus again. We need to fix this. You understand what's at stake, right?" "Oh, I do," I said, glancing at the stack of licensing requests already flagged in my inbox from companies that had read the filings. I understand better than anyone. Because they weren't just using the engine. They'd built their entire go-to-market strategy on it. Pitched it to investors as exclusive tech. Filed decks with screenshots of my module, still annotated with the same notes I made in year 2 of development. They called it proprietary. Problem is, proprietary tech requires ownership. And Parker? He'd fired the one person who could have cleaned up the mess before it became a 9-figure liability. Another voice joined. Legal now. A partner I'd only met twice, both times during rushed merger meetings where everyone assumed I was just tech staff. "Ms. Lang," he said, each syllable slow and deliberate. "We understand there's been a breakdown. We'd like to discuss options." I smiled, not because I had them trapped, but because for the first time in years I was being addressed as the rightful author of what I created. They thought I was gone. But I'd just stepped into the one position they couldn't fill, sole inventor of the thing that made them matter. They were hoping I'd be scared, but all I felt was power. I didn't rush, let them sweat a little. While their Slack channels melted down and executive assistants scrambled to urgently align legal and innovation, I brewed a fresh cup of coffee, slid into my chair, and opened the folder again. The smell of old ink and crisp printouts always calmed me more than any mindfulness app ever could. Subject: IP ownership confirmation. Requested documentation. I attached the scanned original provisional filing. Top left, my name, plain as daylight. Bottom right, my signature, dated 6 months before they ever formed the LLC. The metadata showed the notarized timestamp, and the accompanying email thread with their first GC confirmed the revision request that never got answered. Beneath that, I attached the screenshot of the USPTO record. No assignment on file, no co-owner, no successor in interest, just me. Then, one sentence in the body of the email. As requested, attached is documentation confirming ownership of the compression engine IP, as filed and maintained. I hit send. Exactly 9 minutes later, Marcus called again. This time, his voice was tight, brittle. I just got off a call with the board. They're asking why none of us knew the reassignment was incomplete. They're furious. They should be asking why no one read the contract, I said. Silence. Then came the attempt. "Look, I know things got tense with Parker, but maybe we can find a solution. Can we talk numbers?" Ah, there it was. I swiveled slightly, watching the rain bead down the window of my tiny home office. Across the street, my neighbor was trying to wrestle a garbage bin that had blown over. Real life was still happening out there, unbothered by billion-dollar panic attacks. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice level, "but I'm not assigning ownership. We can discuss licensing." "You're not selling it?" he asked, stunned. "No," I said, calm as ever. "But if you'd like to keep using it, I'll invoice you for a license, per integration, retroactive." A sound escaped him, something between a cough and a choke. "Retroactive?" "You deployed my system into 6 Fortune 500 client stacks," I said, leaning back. "Each one, a custom implementation. That's 6 licenses. Plus your internal usage for demos, sales decks, investor pitches. I'll itemize it for you." "You don't want to negotiate a lump sum?" "Why would I?" I said. "You built your valuation around exclusivity, claimed proprietary control in filings. That's misrepresentation, by the way. Your Series C materials reference a patented in-house algorithm. That's not just a licensing issue. It's disclosure fraud if someone wants to get legal about it. I heard the flutter of pages being turned, muffled voices, then the unmistakable thud of someone hitting the mute button on the other end. I kept sipping my coffee. Because here's the truth they never understood. Power isn't about shouting the loudest in meetings. It's about having the receipts when the shouting stops. They thought their funding round was a victory lap. What they didn't realize is they ran the whole race on borrowed shoes. At 11:24 a.m., I received a new email from their legal team, a draft proposal offering $2 million for full assignment of the patent. I didn't even open it. Instead, I responded with my own terms. $3.5 million upfront, perpetual license, no exclusivity, royalties on all future deployments. They'd get usage rights, sure, but only through my lens, my terms, and my paperwork. They didn't own me. They just rented my silence, and the invoice was overdue. By the next morning, my inbox had become a shrine to desperation. Subject lines like proposal revision, urgent, updated terms, please review, and my personal favorite, a bridge, not a wall. Cute. The same team that once copied me on meeting invites 5 minutes late was now falling over themselves to get on my calendar. They bumped their offer to $2.5 million. Then $3. Add-ons for silence clauses, early payout bonuses, a sad little NDA stapled to the end like a Band-Aid on a bone fracture. They kept using phrases like mutually beneficial, closing the loop, strategic closure. What they wanted was to make me vanish quietly, before the board realized just how many of Parker's public pitches had leaned on proprietary claims they didn't possess. Too late. Meanwhile, the competition had been watching, like wolves just outside the firelight. On Thursday, I got an encrypted message from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Rena Cho, CTO at Novaspan. She and I once shared a dorm wall and a hatred for freshman group projects. She left academia to build tools for secure data mobility and, unlike Parker, actually knew what a compression table did. Her message was blunt. Saw the filings, saw the name, we've got use cases ready. Let's talk. We did. By Friday, Novaspan's legal team sent over their opening move, $7.5 million for full IP acquisition. No royalties, no strings, straight control. I read it twice. Then I politely declined. Because this wasn't about a payday. Not anymore. It was about legacy and owning my narrative. So I countered. $3.5 million upfront. Non-exclusive licensing, royalty structure based on usage tiers. I'd retain IP ownership. They'd gain implementation rights with quarterly audit privileges and expansion options if their integration scaled. Rena responded in under an hour. Done. And we'll feature you as technical co-lead on the white paper. That part? That mattered. It wasn't just about the cash. Though, don't get me wrong, it felt good to finally have a number in my account that didn't start with a 4 and end in panic. It was about being seen, being named, being impossible to edit out of the version history. They sent a press release draft the next day. In it, I was listed as Principal Inventor and Technology Advisor. I scanned the paragraph twice before exhaling. My daughter called that night. She's in her second year of undergrad. Computer science, naturally. She asked how my week was. I told her the truth. It's been good. Quiet, but good. She laughed. Quiet from the outside, maybe. Yeah, she gets it. I didn't need Parker to choke on an apology. I didn't need legal to grovel. I didn't even need the original company to collapse. Though judging by their panicked whispers on LinkedIn, I'd say the damage was settling in. What I needed was this. To reclaim the thing they tried to sideline, to walk into the next boardroom knowing that the next CTO, the next investor, the next anyone would have to go through me. Because now my name wasn't just on a filing, it was on the future they wanted to build. It was the kind of morning that tries to pretend it's spring. Pale sunlight, cold wind, too bright optimism. I pulled into the tech park early, parked 2 levels above ground even though my badge now got me executive parking at Novaspan. I wanted to walk, to feel the shift. The buildings hadn't changed, same glass, same brushed aluminum, same startup cutesy signs pointing to Innovation HQ and the Collab Lab. But the energy? That was different. I passed the security desk without slowing. The guard gave a confused half wave, then noticed the Novaspan logo on my visitor badge and straightened up like I'd walked in wearing a crown. I didn't stop. just nodded once and kept walking. Past the old elevator, past the etched mission statement Parker had insisted be updated last quarter. Bold moves, boundless tech, better worlds. Last I heard, the only bold move was legal asking investors for a grace period on IP disclosures, and the only world they were building was one held together by red tape and panic sprints. Through the glass, I could see them. The war room. Parker stood at the whiteboard, sleeves rolled, eyes wide, red lines and crossed out diagrams everywhere. A flowchart with question marks circled 3 times. Legal sat hunched behind him, whispering into a phone. One of the engineers, the boot camp kid, stared at the board like it was written in ancient Greek, probably because it was my compression logic, stripped and mangled past recognition. They didn't see me right away. I paused, just for a second, and watched. It wasn't schadenfreude, it was confirmation. A picture of a world that no longer included me and couldn't function without me. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Just a message. We underestimated you. No name, no apology, no ask, just those 4 words. I looked at the screen, then up at the conference room where Parker finally noticed me, his eyes locked on mine. He didn't nod, didn't blink, just froze. I turned off my phone. I didn't need to answer. He wasn't talking to me anyway. He was talking to the version of me he'd ignored, the one who took notes instead of credit, who stayed late, rewrote loops, tested edge cases, the woman he never learned to see until it was too late. I continued down the hall to Novaspan's suite. Rena opened the door with a grin and a fresh agenda in hand. "You ready?" she asked. I smiled. Always. We stepped into the boardroom where a new team waited, curious, respectful, ready to listen. On the first slide of the deck, beneath the Novaspan logo, was a simple line in small type. Compression Engine Architecture, licensed from original inventor M. Langford. That was it. No fireworks, no LinkedIn thread, just truth. And in this industry, truth, when documented, time-stamped, and correctly assigned, carries more weight than ego ever could. I sat down, adjusted the mic on my collar, and opened my laptop. Let the next chapter begin.